The problem with sin, whether you know it or not, is when you sin, you literally become a slave. And we'll talk more about this tonight. If there's anyone in this room who is an addict, I come from a long line of addicts. From substance abuse to sexuality to anger, addicts. I mean, over-the-top addicts. Habitual, I can't get out kind of stuff. Have you ever met anybody, or if you're yourself, don't necessarily have a practice of sin, but at one time you jumped into this, and now it calls your name? That's what it does. And I want to walk you through that this morning. That you don't just stop sinning. The biggest thing we see on Sunday morning is people say, here's a sermon on sin. Stop doing that. Okay, I won't do that anymore. Sorry, you don't have that choice. If you can stop sinning, you don't need Jesus. In the Bible, no one ever stops sinning. They're delivered from sin. You have to be saved from sin. You have to be rescued from sin. You cannot stop sin. You can't stop sinning. If you can stop sinning, you do not need Jesus. You don't have to get up in the morning. You don't have to pray. Do whatever you want. If you can stop sinning, you don't need Jesus. You cannot stop. And you can sit here, and you know it's true. You can sit here every Sunday. I'm not going to do this. I'm not going to go out. Yeah, whatever. See you next time. The only chance you have is confessing before, literally, not to men, but before men. And you come down and kneel and say, Jesus, save me. I have given away my God-given right of authority. I've given my right of freedom away, and I'm a slave to this, and I can't quit. I'm a slave. I found that when you go back to the book of Genesis, I got really interested on this, because as a child of God, we have ultimate authority. I thought, I wonder about Adam and Eve, the first humans. Again, Adam is the first son, created for sonship. So, of course, Jesus was eternal as the first son, but Adam was the first one created for sonship, the first human being created for sonship. And I thought, I wonder if Adam and Eve were created with this kind of authority and freedom. And I was astounded. If you look with me in Genesis chapter 1, you've got all this creating going on. On the 6th day, God gets this idea. And he says, hey guys, talking to the other members of the Trinity, hey guys, I got this idea. Let's make man. I want kids. Let's make man in our image and likeness. And it's really specific. I challenge you to search this out yourself. There's language that's used here that before we find it here, it was only ascribed to God. Let me say that again, different ways so maybe everybody can get it if you didn't get it. There's language used here that before man is only used to describe God. But when man appears, it's also used to describe man. It's not used to describe angels. Something brand new comes on the scene. Image of God, people. He says, let us make man in our image and our likeness and let them rule. Angels were not created to rule. We were. Angels were never created to rule. We are heirs to the... Paul E. Bilheimer, one of the best authors on the face of the planet. Read everything he writes. I think he's old and dead now, but he was awesome. Some incredible books, really. Read everything he writes. We are destined for the throne. We see how we're to live in freedom. The sons of God, 12 tribes sitting on 12 thrones, ruling stuff. New coming kingdom. Picking up where we left off. And listen how specific he gets. Of course, he says it in verse 26 that we're to rule over all the earth and all the details. In verse 27, it's not just men, it's male and female we're to rule. And that's been butchered. It's not that man rules and then woman comes along to clean the dishes and sweep the floors. It's seriously, men and women were created to be one and rule together. Equal authority. Verse 28, God said, be fruitful and fill the earth, but also subdue it, he says in verse 28. In other words, bring it under your authority. Rule over it, mentions all the animals. Verse 29, he says, I give you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the entire earth. It's yours. Verse 30, to all the beasts of the earth, all the birds of the air, every creature that moves along the ground. In fact, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give to you. That's the authority man had. In fact, in chapter 2, you have the flushing out of that. Man is tending the earth. Man names the animals. God did not name them. Man named them. Because they're under his authority. Which means God brought this goat before Adam and said, Adam, what do you think? And Adam goes, I'm thinking goat. And goat was his name. Adam named all of that. Which is that's really cool. That's the authority Adam and Eve had. Chapter 3, something happens. Chapter 3, everything goes to pot. Again, most of the people, it's so bizarre. Most people look at the first sin physical. It was not physical. You mean they didn't take an apple from a tree? Whatever. Yeah, sure. But the problem wasn't physical, spiritual. It was physical. He could just, dealt with them. Physically. Cut off an arm so they couldn't do it anymore. Literally, it could have been physical, but it wasn't physical, it was spiritual. But sin is spiritual. Jesus comes to the leaders of Israel and says, listen, you adulterers. They're like, we've never physically, if you've done it in your heart. You rebel, and then the decision is made in that rebellion, and the physical is a consequence of that. So it's not... So when Adam and Eve sinned, by the way, you understand, Satan, Christianity, God is not interested, hear this, God is not interested in just making you do physically the right thing. That's not it. If that was it, then Christianity would be what I hear all the time. I hear people all the time say, well, I physically come to church. I physically don't, do bad things. I don't say the wrong things. I physically give money so I can physically go to heaven. Spiritually, I really don't see the way he sees. I don't feel the way he feels. I don't like what he likes. I don't look at women the way he looks at women. I don't look at men the way he looks at men. I don't like doing what he does. I don't burn for the things that he burns. But I want to go to heaven. Hell doesn't sound like a great place. I'm a Christian. That's ridiculous. That is a warped view of Christianity. It's not biblical. Christianity is not physical, it's spiritual. In fact, really quick illustration. If you've ever, when I was a young Christian, I smoked. I smoked for 10 years before I was a Christian, smoked after I was a Christian. I didn't quit to be a politically correct. I've never really desired to be politically correct in anything. You know me, I don't really care for your opinion. I mean, I'm under your authority this week, but I'm not really interested in being politically correct. I smoked. Jesus came to me one day and said, that's sin. See, what do you mean by that? It's blockading intimacy with me. When you're stressed, you lean on a cigarette. When you're under pressure, you lean on a cigarette. You're addicted to cigarettes. I only want you addicted to one thing, and that's me. And I quit. It took me about a week and a half. I didn't just quit. You can't quit smoking. You're delivered from smoking. If you smoke, no pressure. You want to smoke? Smoke away. Toke up. Okay? You want to smoke? Smoke. I'm not here to tell you stop smoking. But if Jesus is speaking to you about stopping smoking, you're going to find you can't quit. And I'm also going to tell you that you do not need Nicoderm. No offense. That's money-making ploys for the world. I'm telling you, you don't need that stuff. The true people will tell you, if you can find Christian people, Christian scientists, and all those kinds of people that know about the body that I don't even know what they're called, they will tell you that cigarettes is a physical addiction. It's a physical addiction. It takes the body about a week and a half to get over with. Then why in the world have I struggled with for years? You have spiritual bondage in your life. You're a slave. You're a slave. And if you want to quit smoking, the old timers used to say stuff like, they would come down and they'd put their cigarettes on the altar. And of course I would be like, okay, I appreciate that, mammy. Thank you. Yeah, that'll work. No. But there was meaning to that. Ask them, Jesus, deliver me from this. And in a week and a half, I quit. The emphasis was not physical. There was something spiritual going on in my life. And if you look at what happened, Satan is going to come to you just like he came to Adam and Eve. He's going to take something physical. Just as God doesn't want just physical things to change in your life, Satan doesn't want you to just do physical things. He wants you to be a spitting image of who he is. He wants control over you. He wants authority in your life. And just like Adam and Eve, he came to Adam and Eve and said, hey, dangled this apple in front of him. He did not come and say, hate God. He didn't come and say, serve me. Read it. He didn't say that. He just said, God sees the garden like this. God set up everything like this. This is God's plan. This is God's focus. Still, hey, you still want to stay here? That's great. He's still king. But what if you just saw it like this? And when they did that, he got them. And enslaved them. It'll be the same for you. Satan's not going to come to you and say, worship me. He's not going to come to you and say, hate God. You never, ever find anybody like a Brent who's grown up in the church, phenomenal individual, loves Jesus, goes to church. The likelihood of him becoming a satanic high priest is just not good. Seriously, you're not going to come one Sunday. Where's Brent? He's a satanic high priest. Yeah, he's sacrificing goats and everything. It's incredible. That's not how Satan is going to come to him. Satan is not going to come to him and say, hey, serve me. He's going to come to him and say, God views this way. What if you view this way? God looks at women like this. What if you just look at them like this? Satan came to Adam and presented him an alternative. And when Adam bit into that, Adam lost every bit of authority that he was endowed with and came under the authority of the enemy. Which means the entire heaven and earth, not heaven, the entire earth that was under Adam's authority went to Satan. You'd say, how do you know that? I asked you to mark Luke chapter 4, the last place I'll have you turn. And I apologize, I'm giving you a lot to chew on. But in Luke chapter 4, Satan is tempting Jesus. And this issue of authority comes up. In verse 5, the devil leads Jesus up to a high place and shows him in an instant all the kingdoms of the world. And this is what he says to Jesus. I will give you all of their authority and splendor. Listen to this. For it has been given to me, and I can give it to whoever I want. Now I read that and I thought, what bonehead gave that to Satan? You did. And I did. And Adam did. Because when you sin, think about this. When you sin, you're not just doing something physical. You are giving authority over to the enemy in your life. Satan comes. See, here's what Jesus says. Jesus, I'm speaking to you as a child would speak to a child. A son would speak to a son. You are tolerating what no one in the family would tolerate. Not mistakes. You are tolerating rebellion. You know exactly that God doesn't feel this way. The enemy has come to you and said, why don't you feel this way? You've bought into that. And when you buy into that, what you're doing is you are losing your right of sonship and authority, and you become a slave to sin. And you grant authority in your life over to the enemy.